Have you ever planted something you were absolutely sure would thrive, only to come back a few weeks later and find it yellowing, collapsing, or completely dead? You dig it up, hoping to find an answer, and instead, you're greeted by black, mushy roots and soil that feels more like wet cement than garden earth. If you've experienced that frustration, you're not alone. Heavy clay soil has a way of humbling even experienced gardeners. It holds water for long periods, compacts easily, and can turn what should be a beautiful perennial border into a graveyard of root rot. But here's the surprising truth. The problem isn't always your gardening skills. More often than not, it's simply that you're trying to grow plants that were never meant to live in those conditions. Welcome back to Greenest Garden, where we help you work with nature instead of fighting against it. Today, we're looking at 8 incredible perennials that don't just survive in heavy, wet clay soil, they genuinely thrive in it. These are the plants that laugh at soggy conditions, return year after year, and transform difficult areas into some of the most beautiful parts of your garden. So before you spend another season battling root rot, replacing dead plants, or digging endless drainage trenches, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let's dive straight into the first perennial that absolutely loves heavy clay soil. A quick word on clay soil. Before we get into the list, I want to share something that completely changed the way I look at heavy clay soil. Clay gets a terrible reputation among gardeners, and honestly, I understand why. When it's waterlogged, it can feel like a death sentence for many plants. The soil stays wet for days, roots struggle to breathe, and root rot becomes a constant frustration. But here's what most people don't realize. Clay soil is actually one of the most nutrient-rich soil types you can have in a garden. The same tiny particles that make it dense and slow draining also help it hold onto valuable nutrients and release them gradually to plant roots over time. The problem was never your soil. The problem was the mismatch between your plants and your growing conditions. Once you stop fighting your clay and start choosing plants that naturally thrive in it, everything changes. Many beautiful perennials are perfectly adapted to heavy, moisture-retentive soil and will grow stronger, healthier, and more vigorously in clay than they ever would in sandy or fast-draining ground. That's exactly what today's list is all about. These 8 perennials don't just survive in wet clay soil, they absolutely flourish in it. Let's take a look at them one by one. Perennial number 1, Daylily, Hemerocallis. Daylilies are often called the perfect perennial for clay soil, and that reputation is well earned. Their thick, fibrous root system is strong enough to push through dense, heavy clay instead of rotting in it. Once established, they handle wet soil, dry spells, and everything in between without collapsing, making them one of the most reliable plants for gardeners struggling with poor drainage. What makes them even more rewarding is how much they give back with so little effort. Each bloom lasts only a day, but mature plants produce wave after wave of flowers for weeks, creating continuous color from early to late summer. They also multiply over time, filling out garden spaces naturally. So one plant quietly becomes many, turning difficult clay ground into a thriving, colorful display year after year. One more reason daylilies are so loved in clay gardens is how forgiving they are once you get them in the ground. They don't need perfect soil preparation, constant feeding, or delicate care routines. Just a reasonable planting hole and occasional watering during extreme dry spells in their first season. After that, they practically take care of themselves. You can divide them every few years to create more plants, move them around if needed, or simply leave them alone and watch them expand into fuller, more impressive clumps each season. Perennial number 2, Bee Balm Onarda. Bee balm is one of those plants that turns a difficult clay garden into something alive with movement and color. It produces bold, crown-like blooms in shades of red, pink, and purple that seem to glow in mid to late summer. What makes it especially valuable for heavy clay soil is that it doesn't struggle in the density. It adapts to it. In fact, clay naturally slows down its spreading habit, helping you enjoy its beauty without it taking over the whole garden. Beyond its looks, bee balm is a magnet for wildlife. Hummingbirds, bees, and butterflies flock to it the moment it starts blooming, turning your garden into a feeding hub for pollinators. Its aromatic foliage also helps deter deer and rabbits, which means fewer garden battles for you. With good spacing for airflow and mildew-resistant varieties, Bee Balm becomes a low-fuss, high-impact perennial that brings energy and life to even the heaviest soil. In addition to things that makes Bee Balm especially useful in real garden conditions is how well it recovers and keeps going, even after a tough season. In heavy clay soil, where other plants might sulk after excess rain or bounce back slowly from stress, Bee Balm tends to re-emerge strong once established, pushing out fresh growth from its root system each year. Perennial number 3. Siberian Iris. Iris siberica. Siberian iris is one of the most elegant solutions for wet, heavy clay soil because it actually enjoys the conditions that destroy many other irises. Unlike bearded iris, which quickly rots in poor drainage, Siberian iris has tough, fibrous roots that thrive in consistently moist ground. This makes it perfect for low spots, rain-prone borders, or areas where water tends to linger after heavy rainfall. Instead of struggling, it settles in and becomes stronger each year. When it blooms, it brings a soft but striking beauty to the garden, with delicate flowers in shades of violet, blue, white, and yellow rising above a bright, grass-like foliage. Even after flowering, the plant remains attractive, holding its structure through the seasons and adding a clean, architectural look to the landscape. It's the kind of perennial that doesn't just survive clay, it turns it into a backdrop for something genuinely graceful. Another helpful thing to know about Siberian iris is how adaptable it becomes once it settles in. Even though it loves moisture, it can handle short, dry spells better than you might expect, especially when mature. It's one of those perennials that quietly improves the longer it stays in your garden, adding more presence and elegance with very little intervention. Perennial number 4. Astilbe. Astilbe is one of the best choices for shady or partly shaded areas with heavy, wet clay soil because it actually depends on consistent moisture to thrive. While many plants suffer in soil that stays damp, Astilbe responds to it by producing lush, fern-like foliage and tall, feathery flower plumes in shades of white, pink, red, and deep magenta. In clay soil, where water is naturally held longer, it gets exactly the steady hydration it needs to look its best. What makes Astilbe especially valuable is that it keeps giving beauty long after the flowers fade. The plumes dry into soft, textured seed heads that add interest through autumn, while the foliage stays fresh and green for most of the growing season. It's also relatively low maintenance once established, only needing some compost at planting time and protection from intense drying sun, making it a dependable, elegant solution for difficult wet garden spots. One more thing that makes Astilbe especially valuable in real garden use is how reliably it returns every spring without needing constant attention. Once it's established in a moist, shaded clay bed, it builds up stronger crowns year after year, producing fuller plumes and denser foliage with very little effort from you. It also pairs beautifully with other shade-loving plants like hostas and ferns, helping you create a layered, textured garden corner that looks intentional and lush even in difficult wet soil. Perennial number 5. Joe Pye Weed. Eutrochium. Joe Pye weed is a tall, dramatic perennial that feels right at home in heavy, wet clay soil, because that's exactly the kind of environment it naturally grows in. In the wild, you'll find it along stream banks and moist meadows, so your clay garden isn't a problem for its familiar ground. Once established, it shoots up into impressive height, often reaching 3 to 7 feet depending on the variety, and becomes a strong vertical feature in the landscape. In late summer, Joe Pye weed puts on a powerful show with large, dusty pink-purple flower clusters that attract butterflies in huge numbers. It's one of the best plants for turning a dull, soggy corner of the yard into a living wildlife zone. Despite its size and impact, it stays surprisingly low maintenance, returning reliably each year and thriving in exactly the kind of moisture-rich, soil that causes other perennials to fail. Joe Pye weed is especially useful in real garden spaces because it quietly builds structure over time without becoming high maintenance. Once established, it develops a strong, deep root system that anchors it firmly in heavy clay, so even its tall stems stay upright through wind and summer storms. It also tends to emerge later in spring than many perennials, which makes it easier to combine with earlier bloomers without crowding them out, gradually filling in the background as the season progresses. Perennial number 6. Swamp milkweed. Asclepias incarnata. Swamp milkweed is one of the most important perennials you can grow in wet, heavy clay soil because it was literally made for it. It naturally grows in marshes, wet meadows, and roadside ditches where the soil stays moist for long periods, so clay doesn't overwhelm it supports it. Once established, it forms tidy clumps of upright stems with narrow leaves, staying far more controlled and garden-friendly than common milkweed while still handling saturated ground with ease. In mid to late summer, it produces soft, fragrant clusters of pink flowers that become a major feeding station for pollinators, especially monarch butterflies. It's one of the few milkweeds that thrives in consistently moist soil, making it essential for supporting butterfly life cycles in difficult garden conditions. After flowering, it develops elegant seed pods that split open to release silky seeds, adding another layer of seasonal interest while quietly receding and maintaining its presence year after year. One more important thing about swamp milkweed is how well it balances beauty with ecological impact in a very low-effort way. Once established, it doesn't need constant feeding or pampering to perform well in wet clay. It simply returns each year and gradually forms stronger clumps over time. It also behaves in a much more controlled way than common milkweed, so you get all the pollinator benefits without the aggressive spreading that can overwhelm smaller garden spaces, making it both wildlife-friendly and easy to manage. Perennial number 7. Cardinal flower, Elaea cardinalis. Cardinal flower is one of the most striking perennials you can grow in wet, heavy clay soil because it naturally comes from places just like at riverbanks, stream edges, and constantly moist lowlands. Instead of struggling in dense, moisture-retentive soil, it thrives in it, producing strong, upright growth and lush green foliage that stays fresh when many other plants would begin to fail. In the right conditions, it settles in beautifully and becomes a dependable feature in damp garden spaces. In late summer, cardinal flower produces tall spikes of intensely vivid red blooms that almost look unreal in their brightness. These flowers are perfectly shaped for hummingbirds, which makes the plant come alive with constant movement. Once it starts flowering, even though it can be short-lived, it often recedes itself gently, keeping its presence in the garden year after year and turning difficult, wet clay areas into a vivid, living display of color and wildlife activity. One more thing that makes Joe Pye weed especially useful in real garden spaces is how it quietly builds structure over time without becoming high maintenance. Once established, it develops a strong, deep root system that anchors it firmly in heavy clay, so even its tall stems stay upright through wind and summer storms. It also tends to emerge later in spring than many perennials, which makes it easier to combine with earlier bloomers without crowding them out, gradually filling in the background as the season progresses. Perennial number 8. New England aster, Symphyiotricum novi Anglia. New England aster is one of the most reliable ways to bring color into wet, heavy clay soil. Right when the garden is starting to slow down, it naturally grows in moist meadows and along stream edges, so it handles dense, moisture-retentive soil with ease. Once established, it forms strong clumps of upright stems that return bigger each year, giving structure to areas that might otherwise feel dull or exhausted by late season. In late summer through fall, it bursts into a haze of rich purple, pink, or violet daisy-like flowers that can completely transform a fading garden. These blooms arrive at the perfect time for pollinators, especially bees and migrating butterflies like monarchs. which depend on late-season nectar sources. Tough, cold hardy, and low maintenance. New England aster finishes the season strong and keeps your clay garden alive with color right up to the first frost. Another thing that makes New England aster especially valuable in clay gardens is how it fills that late season gap when most other perennials are finished. As temperatures cool, it comes into its full strength, creating a final burst of color that keeps the garden visually active right up to frost. It also gradually forms larger, more impressive clumps over time, so each year the display becomes fuller and more dramatic, without needing extra effort from you. If there's one big idea to take away from all of this, it's that clay soil isn't a punishment. It's just a condition that needs the right match. The real shift happens when you stop forcing plants that prefer dry, fluffy soil and start leaning into plants that actually belong in moisture-rich ground. That's when your garden stops collapsing and starts building itself year after year. Each of these 8 perennials doesn't just survive your clay soil, they improve it. Their roots create structure, their growth adds organic matter over time, and slowly but surely, the ground beneath them becomes easier, looser, and more alive. What starts as frustration turns into a system that gets better every season without constant fixing or replanting. If this helped you rethink your garden, make sure to subscribe to Greenest Garden for more practical, no-stress planting guides like this. Drop a comment and tell me which of these perennials you already have or which one you're excited to try first. And if you're still dealing with the stubborn part of your yard, stick around, because next, we're turning those soggy nothing grows here spots into beautiful low-maintenance rain garden zones. Your soil isn't the problem anymore. Your next plant choice is where the transformation begins.